watch this at night. Hey curious cats, my name is Sahara. Welcome to that true crime channel. Let's get into it. Hamilton Howard Fish was born in May 1870 in Washington, D.C. His mother is Scottish-Irish and his father is English. Something that everybody mentioned, so I thought I should mention it as well, is the fact that his parents had a very huge age difference. His dad was 43 years older than his mother. When Hamilton was born, his father was actually 75 years old. Like, they were both wearing diapers. He would die of a heart attack about 5 years later in 1875. It's actually incredible he died so old, considering life expectancy in the late 19th century was about 40 years old for men. When his father died, Hamilton was sent to an orphanage because his mother just could not afford to take care of her 3 children, so she decided it would be best for them to be taken care of in an orphanage. Since she couldn't, she had no money, she had no job. At some point, Hamilton decides to change his name, mostly because he was bullied by other boys. They would call him Ham and Eggs. Hamilton and Eggs, you probably wonder why. I mean, I did. Well, in this orphanage, the caretakers would often beat the children in front of each other after stripping them naked. They would also order them to beat each other. And Hamilton would often, very often, have erections during those public beating sessions. So the boys started calling him Ham and Eggs, which I suppose, correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess it's a visual representation of his ham and eggs. And the reason he had erections is because he started enjoying those beatings, which reminded me of French author Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He wrote in his autobiography that he received a spanking when he was about 8 years old in boarding school, and instead of feeling pain, he felt pleasure. There was a philosopher and psychoanalyst who studied this autobiography, and he described the spanking as the original event, meaning that it was the one event that triggered masochism in Rousseau. And I think we can say the same thing for Hamilton. The school beatings were probably his original event. Which brings the question, such events, do they trigger masochism or any other type of sexual deviance or sexual behavior, or do they create them? Some experts say that they would have been triggered at some point by some other event, if not the beatings for Hamilton, for example. So Hamilton changed his name to put a stop to being called by this nickname he hated so much, and he chose Albert. Albert was the name of one of his siblings that he had never met since this brother had died very young. It is said that Albert would often run away from the orphanage only to be brought back every time, but luckily for him, he only stayed in the orphanage for about 4 or 5 years. His mother found a government job, so since she was now in a position to take care of her children, Albert and his siblings were able to return home. About 2 years later, so Hamilton, now Alfred, is about 11, 12 years old. He meets a young man and they start a homosexual relationship, which is going to be his first. This young man will introduce him to, brace yourself, urolagnia and coprophagia, drinking pee-pee and eating poo-poo. Can I judge? I feel like I can. As a food lover, I mean, why would you eat poop? There's foods out there, tons of them. I mean, technically, I guess poop can be considered food. It's just been digested first. So, oh, and one thing he liked in particular was to eat the poop straight out of the butt because it was still warm, and also maybe because they didn't have microwaves at the time. So it was just an easy way to get it still warm, you know, I guess. I don't know. Around that same time, Albert started frequently going to public baths, and he would go there to watch young boys undress. And he would actually spend most of his weekends doing that, like it was a normal thing to do on your weekends. And also around the same time, because yeah, a lot of stuff happened around the same time, Albert started writing to single women whose addresses he would find in the Lonely Heart section of the newspaper or through matrimonial agencies. Except he was not looking for love. He was sending very obscene letters. Couldn't he pick video games as a hobby like every other kid? Albert dropped out of school when he was 15 years old, and he started to work as a painter and decorator, and apparently he was very good at it. When he was about 20 years old, the entire family moved to New York City, and that's when he became a male prostitute. He was still a painter, but he was also a prostitute. And he did say that he was struggling with money at the time, but I think it's also because it was the one job that would allow him to explore his sexual fantasies. It is reported that he was experimenting a lot with his customers and he would ask them to do all sorts of crazy stuff on him, with him, in him. It was also upon arriving to New York City that Albert began molesting young boys, usually boys under the age of 6, and he later explained that the reason he chose them so young was because he believed they wouldn't say anything to anyone, or maybe they wouldn't even remember, which is definitely not true. A lot of kids remember being abused before the age of 6. Albert started having problems with the law. He was arrested and convicted of grand larceny. He was arrested for other charges too, such as petty theft, but he was only convicted for grand larceny. And he went to the Sing Sing prison in 1903. I don't think he was incarcerated for very long though. And during his time there, it is said that he would have sex with other inmates quite often. When he turned 28 years old, his mother arranged his marriage to a woman named Anna Mary, and they would have 6 children together. 6 children that supposedly he did not abuse, but he did start to feed them raw meat at some point, and that's when he started consuming raw meat himself. This was the beginning of his journey into cannibalism. What got him the nickname the werewolf of Wisteria is the fact that he would consume red meat very often on full moon nights. But what came before cannibalism was an interest, maybe obsession is a better word for it, for dissection and mutilation, both inflicted and self inflicted. It began when Albert was dating this man who took him to a wax museum where he saw a dissected penis and he was so fascinated. In 1910, Albert started a relationship with a young man named Thomas, and it is said that he was mentally challenged, which is why he would let Albert experiment on him, with him. But I don't think he was okay with being tortured for 2 weeks though, because that's what would end up happening to him. And on the last day, Albert started to cut off his penis, half of his penis, and Thomas started screaming, as you can imagine, and this caused Albert to stop. Instead of going through with his initial plan, which was to mutilate him, kill him, and then eat him, he decided to give him $10 for his troubles, and he set him free. Later, he would claim that the screams were not the only reason. It's also because it was quite hot during those days, and he feared that the body would start to smell and he would get caught. In 1917, Albert and Anna started renting out one of their spare bedrooms to a man named John. Anna would end up leaving Albert for this man. One day, Albert came back home, he found the kids, and all the furniture was gone, and Anna and John were gone as well. She tried to come back later with her lover because they had nowhere to stay. Albert accepted that she come back, but not her lover, obviously. In a way, it's kind of hypocritical because Albert was cheating on her every occasion that he got with men. He was cheating on her with other men, and maybe that's why she felt like she was in a position to ask to come back with her lover, because I think she knew. She did come back to the house alone, but John was actually in the attic. He was hiding, and when Albert found out, he kicked them out. I read an interesting article that mentioned the fact that Albert later would try to blame his wife's infidelity for everything that was going to happen later, him being a pedophile, the murders, the cannibalism, everything. He was like that when he met her, so I don't think she's to blame for anything. Just FYI, Albert married 3 times in his life. Can someone please explain? Because I don't drink pee-pee, I don't eat poo-poo, and yet I'm single. Like, what the hell? Another FYI I thought was interesting to mention as well is the fact that every time he would marry someone, Albert made sure that his wife-to-be was, to some extent, in the same stuff that he was into. When Anna left for good, Albert started behaving strangely with his kids. So as I said, from time to time he would feed them raw meat since he had started consuming it himself, and he would also ask them to hit him, but he presented it as a game, which, if you ask me, sexual gratification from your own children, or any child for that matter, is abuse in my book. And also the raw meat, because I think that's dangerous. I don't know exactly when Albert started mutilating himself. I think it was long before cannibalism, since he was into that much, much earlier than he started being interested in cannibalism. And among other things, he would insert needles in his groin. Sometimes they were so deep into his skin that he was not able to remove them. Another thing he was also fond of was he would take a cotton ball, he would soak it in lighter fluid, He would insert it inside his anus, which I think stings. I don't know, I'm not sure. And then he would set it on fire. And when it comes to self-harm, that was just the tip of the iceberg, because just like David Pocqueray, Albert was very creative. Hey, did you know that the anus possesses the sense of taste? I found this super interesting article. I don't know why I googled it. I just remembered Sheldon Cooper saying that in The Big Bang Theory, like he was talking about the anus possessing the sense of taste. It's a super funny article. I'm not trying to give you any ideas, but it's educational. Don't you love the internet? You learn something new every day. One important element that I found in many articles, but not so much in videos about this case, is the family history of mental illness. So, of course, my first question was, can you suffer from a mental illness if someone in your family does? Basically, can you inherit a mental illness? And the answer, according to my research, is yes, depending on the mental illness. For some mental disorders, such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, autism, depression, there's an 80% chance of it being passed down. 80%. That's quite a lot. I did not expect 80%. Many people have suggested that maybe Albert didn't suffer from an inherited mental illness, but he suffered from brain lesions caused by him falling from a cherry tree when he was 11 years old. This fall resulted in him having strong headaches, dizziness, and he also started stuttering. My second question was the question of brain injury being a major factor in homicidal behavior, because you probably heard of that before. A lot of studies have confirmed that people are more likely to commit violent crimes, including murder, when they have suffered from TBI, traumatic brain injury. You remember the West couple case? That's what happened to, something similar happened to Fred West. And if you don't know about this case, you should watch the video. So as I was saying, Albert's family has a history of mental illnesses. His mother suffered from auditory and visual hallucinations. His brother and sister were in a mental institution and they would end up spending the rest of their lives there. And he also had an uncle who suffered from mania. So 5 of his relatives suffered from a mental illness. 6 if you count Albert. Wait, no, that's actually 4. Wait, that's 5. Wait, I can't count so well when it's nighttime. One of the things that Albert suffered from, because yeah, he had more than one mental affliction, was religious mania. He tried to justify his actions by claiming that he was sent by God to castrate little boys. I couldn't help but link this to the orphanage traumatic experience of being mocked for having erections in front of other kids. Was it a subconscious way for him to get revenge? Did he develop an attraction to those young boys who would beat him since he enjoyed it? Maybe. It felt like Albert had this internal struggle of at the same time loving those boys, the beatings, the delicious pain, but also hatred for them because they would mock him and bully him. Another important thing about his religious mania is that Albert sort of linked his self-inflicted pain and human sacrifices to atonement and cleansing his soul from sins. He was convinced that what he was doing was the way to purification. And since we're on the subject of mental institutions and illnesses, you should know that Albert himself was also sent to a mental institution for some time. He was released eventually because he was not considered to be a danger to himself or others. And this happened when he got caught for sending obscene letters to women. Just to be clear on one thing, Albert's crimes, when it comes to molesting and killing, they happened in 2 stages. First, he started molesting young boys upon arriving to New York City. Then, when his wife left him and he started having hallucinations, religious mania, etc., is when he started creating his collection of torture devices, again, like David Pocqueray, and he became a killer. At first, he would mainly target African Americans and mentally disabled children since he figured these people would not be missed. Also, there's much less chance for him to get caught since police at the time, well, actually, even to this day, they don't give a shit about African Americans. Am I right or am I not wrong? He did also target white kids at some point. Sometimes Albert would even pay other children to help him capture his future victims. Sometimes he would lure them in with candy or pocket money or food. Thank God I wasn't a kid back then in New York City, because you offer me food, I'll follow you anywhere. At the time, tons of kids would play in the streets of New York City with no parental supervision. They would play in hallways or basement of buildings, and that was pretty normal. What earned Albert the nickname of Gray Man is the mother of a missing boy named Frances, who said when she was interrogated by police that she had noticed someone wandering around in the area, talking to himself and behaving very strangely, and he was wearing gray clothes. She said everything about him was faded and gray. The body of Francis would eventually be found hanging from a tree with his suspenders. He had been sexually abused but not castrated, simply because Albert had heard noises, people were getting closer, and he feared to be caught, so he just fled the scene. Another victim was a boy named Billy. One day in February 1927, he was playing with a friend also named Billy in the hallway of their building. Both of them vanished, and one of the Billys was found on the roof. And when he was questioned by police regarding the other Billy's whereabouts, he said the boogeyman took him. And that's when the boogeyman also became another one of Albert's nicknames. Albert confessed to this crime in a letter he sent his lawyer, where he gave details about this murder. He said that once he captured Billy, he took him to a house on Riker Avenue. He stripped him naked, he tied his hands and feet, he burned his clothes, he cut off his ears, nose, and gouged his eyes, at which point he was dead. He cut his belly and he started drinking his blood. He cut off his head, feet, arms, legs below the knees. Some parts of his body were put in bags with rocks that he threw in the river. They sank to the bottom of the river, and I don't think police ever recovered them. And the rest he took home to eat. In this letter, he gave a sort of recipe of a stew that he made with carrots, onions, ears, and nose. He concluded this confession letter saying, "I never ate any roasted turkey that tasted half as good as his sweet, fat little behind did." Seriously. Now let's talk about the murder of Grace Budd, the murder that got him arrested. So as I explained, his MO was to usually lure kids with candy and take them to some sort of basement in the area where he was working at the time. Sometimes he would take them to a remote location, but for his next murder, he decided to proceed in a different manner. He started looking for young men in need of a job through a newspaper ad. In May 1928, Edward Budd, 18 years old, posted an ad with his address saying he was looking for a job in a farm or in the country. Albert showed up at the Budd residence claiming he owned a farm. He introduced himself as Frank Howard, a painter in the city who could use some help around his house and farm. He offered to pay Edward $15 a week, which at the time was a good amount of money, and the Budd family was struggling financially, which is why their son wanted to contribute to the family's expenses. Albert's initial plan was to torture, mutilate, kill, and eat Edward. He set up an appointment with the Budd family to officially hire Edward and bring him back to his farm, but he did not show up, and instead he sent a telegram saying he would come, but later than planned. And there are two reasons for that. The first one is that Edward was 18, he was a strong young man, and Albert felt it would be difficult for him to neutralize him. He saw Edward and he thought, this guy can overpower me in seconds. But the main reason was his sister Grace. When Albert saw her for the first time, he fell in love, sort of. He decided that she was going to be his next victim. He came back to the Budd residence with cream cheese and strawberries, which, if you ask me, was just a ruse to reassure the family of his honesty, like, oh, I really have a farm, and this comes from my farm. And on top of that, he was 58 at the time, so he just looked like a nice grandpa. So he comes back with strawberries and cream, which, in my opinion, is quite sexual, and he claimed that he had a niece in the area and it was her birthday. He offered to take Grace to the party since the girls were pretty much the same age, and he said they would be back around 9 p.m. The family trusted him. He looked innocent enough, even though we all know that appearances can be deceiving. And the way he offered was so casual, like he had not planned it at all. He was actually leaving, he was at the doorstep, and he just turned around and he was like, hey, I could take her because she's the same age as my niece. At first, Grace's mother did hesitate, but her husband said, let the poor kid go, she don't see much good times. And again, Albert was very old, he was offering a job to their son, so they let Grace follow him and they never saw her again. The following morning, Edward was sent by his parents to the police station to report her missing. Flyers were distributed in the area and everybody started looking for her. Newspaper articles related the story with a picture of Grace, her description, as well as a description of this Frank Howard. For some time, the authorities actually expected to receive a ransom letter, but they never did. The police looked into this Frank Howard, and they quickly realized that the address he had given the Budd family didn't actually exist. The flyers were also distributed in police stations around the country, and detectives started receiving hundreds, if not thousands, of reports of sightings in different locations. Police had a couple of leads, one of them being the cream pot, because Albert had actually purchased it from a store. It was not homemade as he had claimed. In 1934, 6 years after Grace had vanished, her mother received an anonymous letter. It was obviously written by Albert, but at the time nobody knew that yet. At least they thought his name was Frank Howard. I'm just gonna read the last part where he wrote about Grace. On Sunday, June the 3rd, 1928, I called you at 406 West 15th Street. Brought you pot cheese, strawberries, we had lunch. Grace sat in my lap and kissed me. I made up my mind to eat her on the pretense of taking her to a party. You said yes, she could go. I took her to an empty house in Westchester I had already picked out. When we got there, I told her to remain outside. She picked wild flowers. I went upstairs and stripped all my clothes off. I knew if I did not, I would get her blood on them. When all was ready, I went to the window and called her. Then I hid in a closet until she was in the room. When she saw me all naked, she began to cry and tried to run downstairs. I grabbed her and she said she would tell her mama. First, I stripped her naked. How she did kick, bite, and scratch. I choked her to death, then cut her in small pieces so I could take my meat to my rooms, cook, and eat it. How sweet and tender her little ass was roasted in the oven. It took me 9 days to eat her entire body. I did not F her, though. I could have, had I wished. She died a virgin. He would later explain that the reason he did not even think about raping her is because he liked young boys. The saddest thing was that Albert was carrying a package with tools that he was going to use to murder and butcher Grace. When he kidnapped her, they took a train to the city. When they left the train, he actually forgot his package on his seat. Grace noticed and she brought it to his attention. On the envelope that Albert sent his letter with, there was a logo that read NYPCBA, which stands for New York Private Chauffeur Benevolent Association. Police investigated on this clue and they asked around at the organization. One employee eventually admitted stealing some envelopes and he said he left some behind when he moved out of the apartment he used to live in. Albert is the person who started renting this apartment after this employee. When police got there hoping to find him, at first there was nobody. They waited. When Albert finally came back home, he was obviously arrested and interrogated by detectives. He immediately confessed to the murder of Grace Budd, and to everybody's surprise, he even admitted to more murders, including Francis and Billy's. Police estimated the number of victims to about 100, but Albert claims he killed children in every state, and the total number is actually much higher. It's closer to 400. It is reported that during the entire time he was interrogated by detectives, Albert had a smile on his face. He led detectives to the crime scene, and there they discovered bloodstains inside the house, on the floor, and the bones of Grace were eventually found somewhere on the property. They also found her skull. Obviously, there were some psych evaluations performed by professionals. Albert spoke about all his fetishes, the cannibalism, the self-mutilation. He spoke about his childhood, the orphanage, the family history of mental illness. As I said earlier, he tried to blame his wife, but also one of his sons. So what happened was one of his sons worked with him, and he was supposed to send his father a check, which he did, and if I understood correctly, I think he sent it later than he was supposed to, which is the reason why Albert had to go back to this apartment to collect his mail, even though he had checked out of the apartment. So technically, he had no plan of going back there, and this shows how organized he was, because what he did was he would never stay in the same apartment. He just kept moving, especially if he had killed a child in the area. So in short, he said, if it wasn't for my son, I probably would not have been arrested, which I think is true. He blamed his wife, he blamed his son, he also blamed God for not sending him angels to prevent the murders, everybody and everything but his fondness for obscene letters. I mean, if he didn't like to write so much to people, he would not have been arrested. The trial of Albert Fish for the murders of Grace, Billy, and Francis started in December 11th, 1935. Sadly, there was no evidence for the other murders, so he could not be tried for them. His lawyers decided that he should plead insanity. They defended him, saying that he was not a sane person. He had all the possible fetishes and perversions you could think of, which according to them could only mean he could not be tried as a sane person. They also argued that he was a family man who had to take care of all his 6 children, being both a mother and a father to them, since their mother had left him for another man. And of course, they brought up the childhood abuse, the trauma, the history of mental illness. They even claimed that he had been exposed to lead since he was a painter, so pretty much his entire life, and that caused him to suffer from lead colic. I'm not sure that has anything to do with being a murderer and a pedophile, since lead colic is basically constipation. So maybe at the time they thought it had some, effects on the brain. I don't know. There are 2 things that I'm not sure were part of the insanity plea, but they were definitely discussed with experts during the psych evaluations. The first one is the biblical reference to Abraham and his son Isaac. Albert was convinced that the sacrifice of young boys was of similar nature to the sacrifice of Isaac, son of Abraham. And he felt like if really what he was doing was wrong, God would send him angels to prevent him from killing, like he did for Abraham. And since no angel ever showed up, he just took it as a divine permission. And the other thing is the cannibalism, the blood drinking, the flesh eating, which is also a biblical reference, but this time to Jesus. Because we remember, we were not there, but we all know about Jesus giving his disciples wine, saying, "Drink, this is my blood." He gave them bread and he said, "Eat, this is my flesh," or my body. I think he said my body. One thing that was definitely taken into account into the verdict is how organized Albert was. One thing I had not mentioned up until now is the fact that he chose to be a painter on purpose. It was the ideal job for him to travel and therefore have more opportunities to be in different places, have more victims, and less chances to be identified and caught. And also, when he would paint, he would wear overalls. Usually, he was naked underneath because it would be easier to undress when he needed to do what he needed to do. And when he would be outside, it was also a sort of, good camouflage because he would wear normal clothes and it would make it harder, if not impossible, for people to identify him and recognize him. Even though the jury did agree that only a crazy man would murder and eat children, they still punished him and sentenced him to death. The trial lasted 10 days, the verdict and sentence were pronounced, and Albert Fish was sent to the electric chair on January the 16th, 1936. When he found out that he was going to be electrocuted, I have a hard time with this word, electrocuted, he said, "What a thrill that will be if I have to die in the electric chair. It will be the supreme thrill, the only one I haven't tried yet." Because of the 29 needles still stuck inside his groin, some in very dangerous places and some actually were reported to have been there for years, a rumor spread saying that there was a short circuit and they had to electrocute him twice to make sure he was dead. This was not true, a fact that was confirmed by the executioner. He said everything went well and he died in 3 minutes. Albert Fish was the oldest man to be executed by electric chair. He was 65 years old. His last words were, "I don't even know why I'm here." Like, dude, seriously? You killed and ate people and poop? Poop is weird, but it's not illegal. Eating people is illegal. Well, actually, it's not. As I was writing this, I did wonder if cannibalism itself was legal or not. I don't know why. I just did. I researched it, and turns out there are no laws against it, at least in some countries. I researched France, Germany, the UK, and the US, and it's not. There are no laws against it. Don't you love this picture? Thank you, Canva. You made me laugh. Also, that video was very funny. She's also eating a woman, if you notice. I'm pretty sure women taste better. Also they have less body hair, so maybe that's why. Don't get me wrong, if you eat someone, you will go to prison, just under a different charge. In France, for example, you could go to prison for torture, murder, barbaric act. We also call it barbaric act. It would not be under the charge of cannibalism. It just does not exist. Even if the victim consented, because yeah, that actually happened in Germany. I'm gonna cover this case, so I won't say no more. Just don't eat people. Did you know that studies have shown that cannibalism causes a disease called Kuru, Kuru? It's like mad cow disease on humans. If you've seen the movie The Book of Eli, they got that fact right. The cows developed mad cow disease because they were being fed animal protein. And for humans, I mean, you can't eat another human being. You can eat animals, but not other human beings, because then you get sick. Makes sense. I just want to share a couple comments that I stumbled upon when I was doing my research. They were after one of the articles that I read and used for this video. This is really sick. I hate this, but I love this. Okay. I think I should report this to the FBI just in case. I love Albert Fish. Okay, that's sad, but okay. While I believe he deserves to burn, he would enjoy it. So let's send him to heaven. It actually makes sense. It does. I just want to explain the love because I think a lot of people use that word. They don't really mean love as in love. I think they just mean they're fascinated by someone because that's pretty much how I feel about Ed Kemper. I would say he's like the one that fascinates me the most, probably because of the mommy issues. And Ed Gein is like maybe second place. But just like Ed Kemper, I find him fascinating in a good way, I guess. Like he's a good study case, I would say. I don't know if I'm making much sense, but I think I understand when some people say they love someone who is really bad. In case you want to know, the letter Albert sent to the Butt family is in the possession of a man who collects what is called murderabilia. This guy who's in the possession of the letter, he also has a strand of hair from Charles Manson. He has this sort of like museum. I'm gonna share a link if you're interested in, seeing what he does. He's also he's an artist. He's a painter. He's the one who painted this. I guess this guy is different in the sense that he has a sort of museum. But I wonder what you think about normal people buying stuff like that. I mean, check it out. This website, they've got all the hits. Dahmer, Heaven's Gate, Jim Jones, H. Holmes, obviously Fish is in the mix, Manson, Ed Gein, Ed Kemper, TED Talk. I thought that one was funny. Just pause and read what's on the t-shirts because it's, I don't know. I want to say it's funny, but at the same time, I don't know if I should. I don't know. I did talk about this when I covered the Heaven's Gate case. If you haven't seen that video, watch it. I think it's pretty cool. It's probably one of the videos that I liked doing the best. Etsy is actually selling stuff like that, and eBay did at some point because that's what I said in the Heaven's Gate video. They were selling the Nike Decades, and after the events happened in 1997, they were selling for a few thousands of dollars. I think the most expensive one was like around $6,000, which is crazy for a pair of Nike, but yeah. And I'm gonna conclude this case with this Son of Sam law. Son of Sam, David Berkowitz, I'm probably gonna cover this case at some point, so I'm not gonna explain who he is right now. I'm just gonna read what the law is, just so you have an idea. It's actually not a law, it's an American English term for any law designed to keep criminals from profiting from the publicity of their crimes, often by selling their stories to publishers. Such laws often authorize the state to seize money earned from the deals, such as book, movie, biographies, and paid interviews, and use it to compensate the criminal's victims, which I think is a good thing. These laws have been criticized as violating the free speech guarantee of the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. The reason this law or this idea of a law that would prevent criminals from making money was born with David Berkowitz. That's why it has his name. I mean, his nickname is the Son of Sam. Basically, what happened was when he got imprisoned, when he was arrested and incarcerated, there were a lot of journalists who were interviewing him, who were interested in him, not just him, but yeah, him a lot, I guess. He said that he never made money from his interviews, but there was a doubt, and some people were just, I don't know, I guess very offended or outraged that this could even happen. And one last thing I want to read about the Wikipedia article. I'm gonna share a link because it's a very short article, not article, but it's a short Wikipedia entry, and it's very like every line is just so interesting. With the advent of the internet and online sales, many Son of Sam laws are now targeting the sale of so-called murderabilia. So yeah, I mean, some people are clearly against it. I want to know what you think. I usually have an opinion, but I think I'm gonna hold this one. Or maybe I'll answer in the comments. So I don't know, just leave a comment maybe, I guess. Random item review. I made this myself and it took me, I think it took me about 2 hours to make it. I had to sew it by hand, which took forever, but I mean, it was worth it because it's really pretty and I get a lot of compliments. The fabric was super, super cheap. The stuff that I needed to buy to make this was super, super cheap. It was ridiculous. I have like a small bag of fabric and like all the stuff that I need to make maybe about like 20-25 face masks, and it cost me 25 euros. The only thing is that it does take time to sew. I mean, the first one it took me maybe like a whole afternoon because I had to figure out, the pattern and everything, and I hadn't sewn in a while, so I just had to watch a few tutorials, and the first one took time. But this one didn't take that long because, then you get the hang of it. But it still takes some time. So I went to the farmer's market the other day, and he had no business being there, but there was this guy selling this. So it's like a handheld sewing machine, which is super cute. Obviously, it had to be pink because it's me and I like pink. So yeah, it was $5. You can find it online for I think like $3, $3, €3, wherever you are. It's like a three. It was a bit more expensive to buy it in person, but at least I didn't have to wait for shipping because usually it takes a long time because they come from China. But yeah, I think it's pretty cool. I haven't used it yet, but I'm gonna post a shorts video maybe next week. I'm hoping next week. So I'm gonna make one and I'll put in the description box how long it took me to make one with this machine. But honestly, the way he used it, it was like so fast. I just had to buy it. So yeah, testing this and I'll get back to you on it. I want to thank the person who requested this case. I don't think I had really any intention of covering it because I've seen a lot of videos about this case and I don't know, I still learned a lot of things, so I'm really happy that I did. Next week is Devon Erickson because I keep receiving messages from people now asking me to cover cases, and I think like the last 10 requests were about this case. So next week is Devon Erickson. Thank you so much for watching till the end. Thank you for staying with me. Well, I guess that's it. I'll see you next week. Bye.